My name is Rebecca Mitchell, 34, and I once believed I had the perfect marriage. 10 years with Michael, building our dream home outside Boston, planning for children soon. Then came the text notification at 2 a.m. while he was on a business trip with his best friend Jason. One glance at that message shattered my world into 1,000 pieces. What followed wasn't just heartbreak, but my carefully orchestrated response that left nothing but ashes in my wake. Where are you watching from today? Let me know in the comments as I share how I burned it all down. I met Michael during our final year at Harvard Law School. I was buried in textbooks at the library, preparing for exams when he approached my table asking if the seat across from me was taken. There was something about his confident smile and the way his eyes crinkled at the corners that made me say yes despite wanting privacy. We started studying together, and soon those study sessions turned into coffee breaks, then dinners, then weekends together. Our connection was instant and undeniable. We shared the same ambitions and values. Both of us wanted successful careers, but also dreamed of family life in the suburbs. Michael talked about having 2 kids, a dog, and weekend barbecues. I envisioned holiday gatherings and family game nights. We aligned so perfectly it seemed the universe had created us specifically for each other. During our courtship, Michael planned the most thoughtful dates. We took weekend trips to coastal Maine where we stayed in charming bed and breakfasts overlooking the Atlantic. On Sundays, we cooked elaborate meals together in my tiny apartment kitchen, dancing to jazz music and drinking wine. When it came time to meet families, his parents welcomed me with open arms, and my parents adored him immediately. It was during our engagement that Jason entered the picture more prominently. Michael and Jason had been friends since childhood, growing up on the same street in Connecticut. Jason was handsome, charismatic, and recently divorced when he became a regular fixture in our lives. Michael insisted on making Jason his best man, saying, "He's been there for everything important in my life. He needs to be there for this too." Our wedding was everything I had dreamed of. We married at a vineyard in the Berkshires in early autumn when the leaves were turning golden and crimson. Jason gave a touching speech about friendship and love that had everyone in tears. Looking back, I should have noticed how his eyes lingered on Michael a beat too long, how his hand rested on Michael's shoulder with unusual intimacy. But I was blissfully blind, floating through the day on clouds of happiness and champagne. After the wedding, we bought land and built our dream home in a leafy suburb outside Boston. Michael had strong opinions about everything from the kitchen layout to the size of the walk-in closets. We selected every fixture, every paint color, every floorboard together. The house became our sanctuary, our achievement, our future. Michael's career at Turner, Bradford, and Wells took off spectacularly. He specialized in corporate law and quickly gained a reputation for his sharp mind and attention to detail. Jason worked at the same firm, and they often collaborated on cases, spending long hours together that I never questioned. Why would I? They were friends and colleagues. My own career in marketing was thriving too. I had been promoted to executive level at a national brand, managing campaigns with multi-million-dollar budgets. Our life looked perfect on paper. We hosted summer barbecues where our friends commented on how beautiful our home was. We threw holiday parties that people talked about for months afterward. We cultivated couple friends with whom we took weekend trips and played tennis. We were that couple everyone envied, the ones who seemed to have it all figured out. We had a 5-year plan mapped out in detail. First, establish our careers, then buy the vacation home on Cape Cod we'd been eyeing, and finally start our family. Michael talked about wanting a son first, then a daughter. We'd even discussed names. Everything was proceeding exactly according to plan. For our 5th anniversary, we took a trip to Italy. Looking back, that was when things first shifted. Michael seemed oddly distant as we wandered the streets of Florence and Venice. He was physically present, but mentally elsewhere, checking his phone more frequently than usual. When I asked if everything was okay, he blamed work stress and promised to be more present. I believed him because I wanted to, After his divorce, Jason became an even more consistent presence in our lives. He joined us for Sunday brunches and holiday celebrations. He was always available when Michael needed someone to watch a game with or grab drinks after work. I welcomed him, believing Michael needed his oldest friend during this demanding phase of his career. I even comforted Jason during his darker post-divorce moments, never suspecting I was consoling the man who was secretly destroying my marriage. Small changes in Michael's behavior started accumulating. He began working later, buying new clothes without consulting me, and suddenly developed an interest in fitness, joining an exclusive gym downtown. His phone became a permanent attachment to his hand, and he'd take calls in another room, speaking in hushed tones. My sister Amanda noticed these changes during a visit, but when she gently suggested something might be off, I dismissed her concerns. "He's under pressure at work," I explained. "They're trying to make partner." I attributed every red flag to stress, ambition, or simple evolution in our relationship. The truth was too threatening to consider. The first time I felt truly unsettled was during a dinner party we hosted for Michael's colleagues. I noticed a strange tension between Michael and Jason. They barely spoke directly to each other all evening, yet seemed hyper-aware of each other's movements. When their hands accidentally touched while reaching for the wine bottle, both recoiled as if burned. I remember thinking it odd, but pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on being the perfect hostess. Little did I know that evening was just the beginning of discovering the elaborate deception being orchestrated right under my nose by the man who had promised to love me forever and his supposed best friend who had welcomed me into their lives. The first concrete change that triggered my suspicions was Michael's new phone habits. After 5 years of marriage where we knew each other's passwords and freely used each other's devices, he suddenly password protected everything. I noticed him angling his screen away when I walked into a room, and he began taking his phone with him even for short trips to the bathroom. Simultaneously, our once passionate physical relationship began to cool dramatically. Michael's excuses ranged from headaches to work exhaustion to early morning meetings. When we did connect intimately, it felt mechanical, as if he was merely fulfilling an obligation. I started wondering if he found me unattractive, even buying new lingerie and scheduling more frequent salon appointments. The problem, I would later discover, wasn't about my appearance at all. Our joint credit card statements began showing unusual charges. Expensive restaurant bills on nights he claimed to be working late. Hotel charges in Boston when he supposedly had early meetings and didn't want to wake me by coming home. A jewelry purchase that never materialized as a gift for me. Each time I questioned these expenses, Michael had ready explanations that sounded plausible if you wanted to believe them. When I directly asked about his increasingly frequent late nights, Michael became uncharacteristically defensive. "Do you not want me to succeed?" he snapped once, making me feel guilty for even asking. "This partnership track requires sacrifice. I thought you understood that." His response left me feeling foolish and unsupportive, exactly as he intended. My growing unease led me to confide in my sister Amanda over lunch. "Have you considered that he might be having an affair?" she asked gently after hearing about his behavior changes. The question hit me like a physical blow. Of course I had considered it in my darkest moments, but hearing someone else verbalize it made the possibility suddenly, terrifyingly real. Michael's weekend fishing trips with Jason became a regular occurrence that spring. Neither of them had shown any interest in fishing during the decade I'd known them. Michael would return from these trips without fish, with unburned skin despite claiming to be on the water all day, and strangely energized rather than tired. Once, I found a hotel receipt in his jacket pocket from a weekend he was supposedly at a lakeside cabin with poor cell reception. My anxiety grew until it became a constant companion. I developed insomnia, lying awake listening to Michael's breathing beside me, wondering what secrets filled his dreams. My work performance suffered as I found myself checking his location on our shared account or scrolling through our phone bill during meetings. I lost weight without trying, my appetite diminished by constant worry. When I finally gathered the courage to confront Michael with my suspicions, his response was textbook gaslighting. "You're being paranoid," he said with a look of concern that seemed almost genuine. "Maybe you should talk to someone professional about these trust issues." He even suggested that my sister Amanda was planting ideas in my head because her own marriage had failed. He turned my legitimate concerns into a reflection of my psychological issues rather than his behavior. Taking his suggestion at face value, I actually did schedule an appointment with a therapist. Dr. Marshall listened to my concerns and gently suggested that while trust issues might be at play, my husband's behavior did warrant further investigation. "Trust your instincts," she advised. "They're often more accurate than we give them credit for." One evening, I overheard Michael on the phone in his home office. The door was slightly ajar, and his voice carried that intimate tone reserved for private conversations. "I miss you too," he murmured. "No, she has no idea. Don't worry." By the time I pushed the door open, he had ended the call and claimed he was speaking with a client about sensitive case details. Our 10th anniversary was approaching, and I had planned a weekend getaway to the Berkshires, back to the region where we'd married. 2 days before our departure, Michael canceled, citing an emergency work meeting that couldn't be rescheduled. When I called his office to send lunch for the team working through the weekend, his assistant seemed confused. "There's no emergency meeting scheduled," she said before quickly backtracking. "Oh, it must be the confidential case. Let me check with Michael directly." Jason's behavior around me had also changed. At our friend Taylor's birthday party, he could barely maintain eye contact with me. When I asked about their recent fishing trip, he gave details that contradicted Michael's version. According to Jason, they'd caught bass, while Michael had mentioned trout. A small discrepancy, but telling. My suspicions about Jason specifically grew stronger. Previously, I had imagined Michael might be seeing a female colleague or client, but certain moments started to take on new meaning in retrospect. The lingering glances between them at social gatherings. The inside jokes I wasn't privy to. The way their friendship had intensified rather than diluted after our marriage, contrary to the usual pattern. In a last-ditch effort to reconnect with my husband, I planned a romantic evening at home. I prepared his favorite meal, opened an expensive bottle of wine, and wore the dress he had once said made me look beautiful. Throughout dinner, Michael seemed distracted and checked his watch repeatedly. When I suggested we take our wine upstairs, he claimed to have briefs to review and retreated to his office. I cried myself to sleep that night, feeling more alone than I ever had in our king-sized bed. At work, my coworker Stephanie noticed my distraction and weight loss. Over coffee, she shared her own experience discovering her ex-husband's affair. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, she confided. It was the gaslighting, making me feel crazy for suspecting the truth that was right in front of me. Her words resonated deeply, validating my experience and strengthening my resolve. After weeks of confrontations that led nowhere, I made a strategic decision to stop asking questions directly. Michael had proven himself adept at denial and deflection. If I wanted the truth, I would need concrete evidence. No more accusations without proof. No more accepting transparent excuses. I would become the detective in my own marriage, a role I never wanted but now embraced out of necessity. My evidence gathering began methodically. I created a detailed spreadsheet documenting every unexplained absence, every inconsistent story, every unusual charge. Patterns emerged immediately. Michael was working late primarily on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and his weekend disappearances followed a regular 3-week cycle. These weren't spontaneous events, they were scheduled rendezvous. Technology became my ally in uncovering the truth. Our iPad at home was still linked to Michael's iCloud account. While he had become vigilant about his phone, he had forgotten this connection. I installed a tracking app that showed me his location history. What I discovered was illuminating. His work meetings consistently led him to an upscale condominium complex in Back Bay. A quick property search revealed the owner of Unit 712, Jason Fielding. Still, I needed more concrete proof. After much internal debate, I hired a private investigator named Diana. "I've been doing this for 20 years, she told me during our initial consultation. "The patterns are always the same, only the names change." Her matter-of-fact approach was oddly comforting. This wasn't just happening to me, it was a recognizable scenario she had documented hundreds of times. I took a half-day off work, telling my assistant I had a dental appointment. Instead, I parked across from Michael's office, my heart pounding so loudly I thought passers-by might hear it. At 12:30, right on schedule, Michael emerged from the building. Instead of heading to the client lunch on his calendar, he walked 2 blocks and slid into Jason's silver Audi. They drove to the Four Seasons Hotel and entered together, Michael's hand briefly resting on Jason's lower back as they walked through the revolving door. I sat in my car for nearly an hour afterward, feeling strangely numb. Our phone plan provided detailed records of calls and texts. Michael had been careful about calls, but the volume of text messages between him and Jason was revealing. Hundreds of exchanges, many occurring late at night or early morning, times when Jason should have no legitimate business reason to contact my husband. Some nights they texted back and forth for hours while Michael claimed to be working beside me in bed. Among Michael's belongings, I found a gift receipt for an expensive watch from Cartier. Our anniversary had passed without him giving me any gift, claiming we would celebrate properly once his workload decreased. The watch, I now realized, had been for Jason, a token of their secret relationship conducted under my trusting nose. One evening while Michael was at a client dinner, I accessed his email on our shared home computer. He had changed most of his passwords, but his personal email still auto-filled the credentials. There, in an archived folder labeled Property Documents, I found exchanges between him and Jason dating back nearly 3 years. They contained not just evidence of their affair, but intimate details about their relationship, plans for their future, and worse, discussions about me and how to manage my suspicions. Rebecca seemed concerned when I canceled our anniversary trip, Michael had written. I told her it was work. She believes me for now, but we need to be more careful. Jason's response chilled me. She trusts you completely. That's our advantage. Just keep reassuring her and she'll accept whatever you say. The private investigator delivered her report 2 weeks after I hired her. It contained photographs of Michael and Jason entering and leaving the Back Bay condo together, holding hands when they thought no one was watching, kissing in Jason's car. Diana had also documented their weekend fishing trips to a boutique hotel in Vermont. The evidence was irrefutable and devastating. The betrayal was made even more painful by the realization that their affair had been going on for years, not months as I had suspected. According to email timestamps and hotel receipts, it had begun shortly after our 5th anniversary trip to Italy. 3 years of lies. 3 years of making me question my own sanity. 3 years of building a life with me while secretly planning another with Jason. I consulted with a divorce attorney, Meredith Zhang, without telling Michael. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, she explained. Given the circumstances and duration of the affair, especially involving his colleague, we have a strong position. I provided her copies of all my evidence and began preparing financially for the storm ahead. I methodically downloaded and saved all evidence to a secure cloud account that Michael couldn't access. Emails, photos, location data, credit card statements, phone records. I created a timeline of the affair, noting key events and discrepancies in Michael's stories. The dossier I compiled would have impressed federal prosecutors with its thoroughness. My financial investigation revealed more betrayals. Michael had been siphoning money from our joint savings into a separate account. He had made several large transfers to Jason, disguised as investment opportunities in our financial records. They had even looked at property together in Vermont, according to emails, planning their future getaway while I remained ignorant in our dream home. One revelation led to another. I arranged coffee with Maria, Jason's ex-wife, under the pretense of getting her input on a marketing campaign targeting recently divorced women. After some surface conversation, I carefully steered the topic toward their marriage breakdown. Was there someone else? I asked sympathetically. Maria gave me a long look before answering. I always suspected Jason wasn't being honest about his sexuality, she said quietly. There were signs I ignored because I loved him. I sometimes wonder if your husband knew more than he let on during that time. Her comment wasn't an explicit confirmation, but her knowing expression told me she had connected the same dots I had, perhaps long before me. The final confirmation came unexpectedly. Michael had told me he was spending the weekend with his parents in Connecticut, and I had planned to visit my sister Amanda. At the last minute, Amanda's child developed a fever, and I canceled my trip. Acting on intuition, I drove to Jason's condo and used the building access code I had seen Michael input on a previous occasion. I took the elevator to the 7th floor and walked to Unit 712. Using my keyring, I knocked softly on the door. Michael answered, wearing only pajama bottoms, his hair disheveled. Behind him, I glimpsed Jason approaching from the bedroom area, equally undressed. The look of shock on Michael's face would have been comical under different circumstances. "Rebecca," he stammered. "What are you doing here?" "I thought you were at Amanda's." "And I thought you were at your parents'," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Looks like we both made incorrect assumptions." I turned and walked away, my footsteps echoing in the hallway as Michael called after me. I had all the evidence I needed now. It was time for the confrontation I had been preparing for. I chose to confront Michael on a Sunday evening when I knew we would both be home with nowhere to escape to. I had prepared meticulously, printing key pieces of evidence and arranging them in a folder on the kitchen island. When he returned from his morning run, I was sitting calmly at the counter, a cup of coffee cooling before me. "We need to talk," I said simply. Michael looked wary but sat across from me. "What's going on?" "You've been acting strange lately." I slid the folder toward him. "I know about you and Jason. I know everything." He started to protest, but his words died as I methodically laid out the evidence before him. The hotel receipts, the location data, the photographs from the private investigator, the transcripts of intimate emails. With each new piece of evidence, his face grew paler. "This is insane," he attempted, but his voice lacked conviction. "You hired someone to spy on me? That's a complete invasion of privacy. Is that really your concern right now?" I asked, my voice trembling despite my efforts to remain composed. "Not the 3 years of lying? Not the betrayal of our marriage vows?" His denial crumbled quickly in the face of such overwhelming evidence. Anger followed, a defensive rage directed at me for uncovering his deception rather than at himself for perpetrating it. "You had no right to go through my personal correspondence," he snapped. "And you had no right to make a mockery of our marriage," I countered. Finally came the tears I had never seen from my stoic husband. He buried his face in his hands and sobbed, his shoulders shaking. "I never meant to hurt you," he said, the most predictable line in the cheater's handbook. "How could this possibly not hurt me?" I asked incredulously. During our confrontation, Michael's phone buzzed repeatedly. He had been texting under the table, alerting Jason. Within 20 minutes, the doorbell rang. Michael moved to answer it before I could object. Jason entered our home with the familiar ease of someone who had been there countless times before. But now his presence felt like a violation. He stood awkwardly in our kitchen, his eyes darting between the evidence spread across the counter and my tear-stained face. "Rebecca, I'm so sorry," he began. "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't pretend this is some recent development you regret. Your emails go back 3 years. 3 years of coming to our home, accepting our hospitality, pretending to be my friend while sleeping with my husband behind my back." What followed was a 3-way argument that revealed the full timeline of their betrayal. It had begun during a business trip to Chicago shortly after our anniversary in Italy. What started as a drunken encounter had evolved into an ongoing relationship that they had carefully concealed while maintaining our social facade. "I still love you, Rebecca," Michael insisted, reaching for my hand across the counter. I pulled away as if burned. "I've discovered things about myself, about who I truly am. But that doesn't erase what we have." "What exactly do we have, Michael? A marriage built on lies? A future planned around deception?" "We could find a way forward," he suggested hesitantly. "Many couples have open marriages now. We could adapt, make new arrangements that work for everyone." The audacity of his suggestion left me speechless. Jason shifted uncomfortably beside him, clearly not expecting this turn in the conversation. "I think I should go," Jason mumbled. "Yes, you should," I agreed coldly. "But understand this. You're not just taking my husband. You're taking the man who destroyed any faith I had in love, trust, and basic human decency. Congratulations on your prize." After they both left, I collapsed on our kitchen floor, overwhelmed by emotions I couldn't even name. Betrayal, certainly. Rage, absolutely. But also a devastating sense of foolishness. How had I not seen it? How had I been so completely deceived by the person I thought I knew best in the world? I called Amanda, barely able to form coherent sentences through my sobs. She arrived within an hour, packed a bag for me, and took me to her home. That night, curled up in her guest room, I stared at the ceiling until dawn, replaying every moment of my marriage, reinterpreting every memory through this new, painful lens. The next day brought another shock. Michael's parents called, not to offer support but to talk some sense into me. Apparently, Michael had told them I was having a breakdown and making wild accusations because of work stress. Even now, he was controlling the narrative, casting me as unstable rather than himself as unfaithful. When I returned home 2 days later, Michael had removed many of his personal belongings. A note on the counter informed me he was staying at Jason's until things calmed down. The casualness of his message, as if we were having a minor disagreement rather than the complete implosion of our marriage, ignited a new level of fury within me. More revelations followed. Friends began calling, checking in with careful phrases that revealed they had known or suspected the affair. "We didn't want to get involved," explained one couple who had vacationed with us multiple times. "It wasn't our place to say anything." Their loyalty to comfortable silence over painful truth felt like a secondary betrayal. Michael suggested couples therapy, a gesture that might have seemed conciliatory if I hadn't discovered he was still actively living with Jason. We attended one catastrophic session where the therapist, after hearing both sides, looked directly at Michael and said, "You can't repair a marriage while actively continuing an affair." Michael stormed out, claiming the therapist was biased. My professional life began to suffer as my personal life disintegrated. I made careless mistakes in presentations. I forgot important client calls. My boss, Patrick, called me into his office after I missed a crucial deadline. "I don't know what's going on in your personal life," he said kindly, "and you don't have to tell me, but take some time if you need it. Your job will be here when you're ready to fully return to it." His compassion broke through my professional facade, and I found myself telling him everything. His support was immediate and practical, time off approved, workload redistributed, and a recommendation for a therapist specializing in betrayal trauma. While I was struggling to function, Michael was busily shaping public opinion. Mutual friends reported he was telling everyone he had finally accepted his true sexuality and that I was having trouble processing it, casting himself as brave and me as bigoted. The narrative omitted the years of deception, the financial betrayal, and the psychological toll his actions had taken on me. Depression settled over me like a heavy blanket. I lost more weight. I slept either too much or not at all. I avoided social gatherings where I might have to explain my situation or, worse, encounter people who already knew details I wasn't ready to discuss. It was during this darkest period that clarity finally emerged. Lying awake at 3 a.m., Staring at the ceiling of what had once been our bedroom, a realization crystallized. I deserved better. Not just better than a cheating husband, but better than this diminished version of myself, this victim role I had unconsciously adopted. The next morning, I called Meredith Zhang, the divorce attorney I had consulted earlier. "I'm ready," I told her. "I don't just want a divorce. I want justice." "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking scorched earth," I replied, surprising myself with the cold determination in my voice. "He's taken enough from me. I won't let him take my dignity or financial security too." Together, we developed a comprehensive strategy that would not just end my marriage, but ensure Michael and Jason faced appropriate consequences for their actions. As I reviewed the plan, a strange calm replaced my chaotic emotions. This wasn't about revenge, I told myself. It was about justice, about restoring balance to a situation where I had been grievously wronged. The decision moment came when Meredith asked if I was absolutely certain I wanted to proceed so aggressively. "Once we start down this path, there's no turning back," she cautioned. I thought about the life I had believed in, the future we had planned, the trust one had given so completely. "I'm not going to just walk away," I said firmly. "I'm going to walk away with everything I deserve." My Scorched Earth campaign began with financial protection. While still legally entitled to access our joint accounts, I transferred half of our savings into a new account in my name only. I wasn't taking anything I wasn't entitled to, simply securing my assets before Michael could hide or deplete them. When he called raging about the transfer, I calmly reminded him that I had left his half untouched, which was more consideration than he had shown me during 3 years of deception. Next came a brilliant strategy suggested by Meredith: consultation appointments with the top 3 divorce attorneys in Boston. These meetings, which I carefully documented, served a dual purpose. First, they provided me with expert opinions on my case. Second, they created a conflict of interest that prevented these attorneys from representing Michael. When he eventually tried to retain Patricia Walton, the most aggressive divorce lawyer in the city, he was informed she had already consulted with me and couldn't ethically take his case. I gathered every financial document I could find, creating a comprehensive record of our assets and liabilities. This process revealed more betrayals. Michael had been using our joint funds to purchase gifts for Jason, pay for their getaways, and even make a down payment on a timeshare in Vermont. Each discovery strengthened my legal position while further dissolving any lingering emotional attachment. One of Michael's vulnerabilities was his position at the law firm. Turner, Bradford, and Wells had a clear policy against romantic relationships between colleagues that could create conflicts of interest. While being gay wasn't an issue, concealing a relationship with a colleague while both worked on the same cases represented a serious ethical breach. I scheduled a meeting with Gerald Turner, the founding partner and Michael's mentor. "I'm not here to damage Michael's career," I explained, sitting across from Gerald in his corner office. "But the firm needs to be aware of a situation that could potentially expose it to liability." I presented evidence that Michael and Jason had worked together on the Brennan merger while concealing their relationship, creating a conflict of interest that could potentially invalidate billable hours and compromise client confidence. Gerald's expression grew increasingly grave as he reviewed the documentation. "I appreciate you bringing this to my attention," he said finally. "The firm will address this matter internally." Within our social circle, I was strategic rather than vindictive. I didn't broadcast the affair indiscriminately, but instead shared the truth with key individuals when they reached out to me. Amanda hosted a small dinner where several of our closest friends were present. When questions about the separation inevitably arose, I presented the facts calmly, with evidence available for anyone who questioned my account. "I'm not asking anyone to choose sides," I said, though I knew many would. "I'm simply ensuring the truth is known." On social media, I made a single, carefully worded post. "Life sometimes forces us to recognize painful truths about those we love." As I navigate this unexpected chapter, I'm grateful for friends who value honesty and integrity as much as I do. The post revealed nothing specific yet signaled to our wider circle that something significant had happened. The supportive comments flooded in immediately, many from people who had already heard rumors about Michael and Jason. While Michael was at a weekend legal conference with Jason, I had the locks changed on our house. Massachusetts law permitted this action as I had documented safety concerns based on Michael's increasingly erratic behavior. When he returned to find himself locked out, his furious phone call was met with my attorney's number and instructions to have his legal representation contact her regarding property access. The most public element of my strategy came when I had divorce papers served to Michael during an important client dinner at Lou Bernardine. The process server, a woman in a business suit who blended perfectly with the upscale restaurant clientele, approached his table discreetly. But the impact was anything but discreet. Michael's face flushed crimson as he accepted the envelope, and his client's expressions of surprise were noticed by several other diners. By morning, news of the incident had spread throughout his professional circle. Jason didn't escape consequences either. An anonymous tip to the ethics committee at his workplace detailed how he had potentially compromised client confidentiality by discussing cases with Michael in non-professional settings. The source couldn't be traced to me, but the timing left little doubt about its origin. The resulting internal investigation created professional complications that distracted him from supporting Michael during the divorce proceedings. One of the most difficult steps was sending a detailed letter to Michael's conservative family. They had welcomed me as a daughter for a decade, and I had genuine affection for them. But they needed to understand why their son's marriage was ending. I enclosed only the most irrefutable evidence, explaining that while I respected their relationship with their son, I couldn't allow myself to be portrayed as the villain in a story where I was the victim. The social consequences of my actions spread quickly. At our friend Taylor's wedding, which we had both been invited to before the separation, I attended alone and became the center of sympathetic attention. When asked directly about Michael's absence, I simply said, "He's otherwise engaged with Jason Fielding, allowing others to draw their own conclusions." During the annual charity gala for the Boston Legal Aid Foundation, where Michael and I had always been visible supporters, I attended as the guest of Gerald Turner himself. During cocktail hour, several of the firm's partners approached me with subtle expressions of support. It became clear that Michael's partnership track had been derailed, not by my revelations directly, but by his own ethical lapses that my evidence had brought to light. Meredith used our substantial evidence to negotiate extremely favorable divorce terms. Massachusetts law typically mandates equitable distribution of assets in divorce, but Michael's documented misuse of joint funds, along with the professional and personal humiliation he now faced, made him eager to settle quickly and quietly. The resulting agreement granted me the house, the majority of our investments, and a substantial cash settlement. As my strategy unfolded, Michael's attempts to salvage his reputation grew increasingly desperate. He sent emails to friends claiming I was unstable and vindictive. He tried to frame himself as a victim of my homophobia rather than as the perpetrator of extended deception. These efforts backfired spectacularly when I forwarded his accusatory emails along with dated evidence of his affair to the recipients, allowing them to judge for themselves who was being truthful. The pressure began affecting Jason and Michael's relationship as well. Jason lost a major client who requested reassignment after hearing rumors about the scandal. Their romantic weekend getaways ceased as financial and professional pressures mounted. Friends reported seeing them arguing publicly at restaurants, their perfect union cracking under real-world stress. When Michael attempted to paint me as mentally unstable during preliminary divorce proceedings, I was prepared. My therapist provided a statement confirming I was experiencing normal trauma responses to betrayal but was otherwise psychologically sound. My boss submitted a letter attesting to my continued professional competence despite personal challenges. Michael's attempt to use my emotional pain against me only strengthened the court's sympathy for my position. In a move that particularly irritated Michael, I interviewed for and received an offer from Bradford and Associates, his firm's main competitor. Though I had no legal background, my marketing expertise was valuable to their corporate communications department. The position came with a substantial salary increase and the added benefit of making Michael profoundly uncomfortable in Boston's tight-knit legal community. One particularly effective element of my strategy involved Jason's ex-wife, Maria. Once I confirmed she had suspicions about their marriage similar to mine, I shared relevant information about the timeline of Jason and Michael's relationship. This allowed her to reopen her alimony case with evidence that Jason had misrepresented the circumstances of their divorce. The resulting legal complications further strained Jason and Michael's relationship as Jason's financial obligations to Maria were reassessed. Throughout this period, I maintained a calm, calculating approach that contrasted sharply with Michael's emotional unraveling. While he sent rambling late-night texts and left tearful voicemails, I communicated exclusively through attorneys or in writing, documenting every interaction. His loss of control only highlighted the difference in our characters, further strengthening my position in both legal and social contexts. My final power move came when I accepted a dinner invitation from Richard Bennett, a senior partner at Michael's firm who had been his mentor before the scandal. Our dinner was purely professional, discussing my new marketing role and potential client overlaps. But photographs of us leaving the restaurant appeared on several social media accounts, causing Michael to call me in a jealous rage despite having no right to opinions about my personal life anymore. "Are you dating Richard now?" he demanded. "My personal life is no longer your concern," I replied calmly before ending the call. By month 3 of my Scorched Earth campaign, cracks in Michael and Jason's relationship were visible to everyone in our social circle. The fantasy of their relationship had been sustained by secrecy and the thrill of forbidden connection. Under the harsh light of public scrutiny and real-world consequences, their bond began to deteriorate. Jason, facing his own professional challenges, began to resent being drawn into my conflict with Michael. Michael, watching his carefully constructed life crumble, directed his frustration toward the man he had risked everything to be with. Their relationship, born in deception and nurtured through betrayal, proved ill-equipped to withstand the consequences of exposure. What they had mistaken for love was revealed as something less substantial, less enduring. And while I took no pleasure in their pain, I couldn't help but see a certain justice in the natural consequences of their choices. The divorce was finalized 6 months after I served Michael with papers, a relatively quick resolution by Massachusetts standards. The terms heavily favored me, granting me ownership of our home, 60% of our investment portfolio, and substantial alimony for 3 years to maintain the standard of living established during the marriage. Michael accepted these terms without significant protest, eager to end the public spectacle our divorce had become. The professional consequences for Michael were severe and lasting. While he wasn't fired from Turner, Bradford, and Wells, he was removed from the partnership track he had been on for years. The ethical violations discovered during the divorce proceedings had damaged his standing with the firm's leadership. Clients requested reassignment, uncomfortable with the drama surrounding him. His billable hours dropped dramatically, affecting his compensation and status. Jason fared little better. The firm transferred him to their Providence office, ostensibly for organizational restructuring, but clearly a demotion and an attempt to separate him from Michael. The smaller office offered fewer opportunities for advancement and less prestigious cases. His professional reputation, once sterling, was now tarnished by whispers of ethical misconduct and personal indiscretion. Our social circle realigned itself in unexpected ways. While I had anticipated some friends choosing Michael out of loyalty or convenience, I was surprised by how many rallied around me instead. People respect honesty and courage, I discovered, even when it makes them uncomfortable. Michael's deception had betrayed not just me but everyone who had believed in our marriage. Michael's family's reaction was particularly painful for him. His conservative parents temporarily cut contact after receiving my letter, unable to reconcile their son's actions with their moral values. While they eventually resumed communication, their relationship remained strained. His sister Caroline reached out to me privately, expressing her support and apologizing for her brother's behavior. At work, my professional standing actually improved following the divorce. My colleagues' respect for how I handled personal adversity translated into new opportunities. 3 months after the divorce finalized, I received a significant promotion, taking over as Director of Marketing Strategy with a substantial salary increase and expanded responsibilities. The proceeds from the divorce settlement allowed me to purchase a stylish condominium in Back Bay, ironically just blocks from where Jason had lived during the affair. The property, with its modern amenities and spectacular city views, became a symbol of my new independent life. I furnished it entirely with new pieces, wanting nothing that carried memories of my previous life with Michael. Despite these external victories, my internal landscape remained complicated. I struggled with trust issues that affected new friendships and potential romantic connections. Nightmares disrupted my sleep, often featuring scenarios of betrayal and public humiliation. My therapist assured me these were normal responses to trauma that would gradually diminish with time and healing. The divorce created ripple effects throughout our extended social network. Friends felt compelled to choose sides, resulting in strained relationships and awkward social gatherings. Holiday parties became diplomatic challenges, with hosts carefully managing guest lists to avoid uncomfortable encounters. I lost relationships with people I had genuinely cared about, collateral damage in the explosion of my marriage. 6 months after our divorce, Michael began making attempts at reconciliation. First came text messages expressing regret, then emails detailing how much he missed our life together. I learned from mutual friends that Jason had ended their relationship, unable to withstand the professional and personal pressure it had created. Michael, suddenly alone and facing the full consequences of his choices, turned back to what he had discarded. "I made the biggest mistake of my life," he wrote in one particularly desperate email. "I threw away something real and valuable for something that wasn't built to last." I never responded to these messages. The time for such conversations had long passed. The woman who might have been moved by his regret no longer existed, transformed by betrayal into someone stronger, but also more cautious, more self-protective. My new perspective brought clarity about the past. I realized our marriage had contained warning signs I had willfully ignored. Michael's emotional unavailability, his prioritization of work and male friendships, his discomfort with discussions about starting a family. These weren't just personality quirks, but indicators of his internal conflict about the life we were building. Therapy helped me recognize that while Michael's betrayal was inexcusable, his struggle with his sexuality was separate from his choices about honesty. He could have approached his identity questions with integrity, involving me in his journey rather than deceiving me for years. The betrayal wasn't that he was attracted to men, but that he had built a life with me knowing he couldn't fulfill the promises he had made. 8 months after the divorce, I had an unexpected encounter with Michael at a grocery store near my new condominium. He looked disheveled, had lost weight, and seemed startled to see me. We exchanged awkward greetings in the produce section, the mundane setting highlighting the surreal nature of our new relationship as strangers with a shared history. "You look well," he said, eyes taking in my new haircut and confident posture. "Thank you," I replied, noticing but not commenting on his evident decline. "I'm moving to Chicago next month," he offered. "Fresh start." I nodded, wishing him well with surprising sincerity before moving on to the bakery section. The encounter left me thoughtful but not devastated, a sign of healing I recognized with quiet satisfaction. Anonymous gifts began arriving at my office and home. flowers without cards, gourmet food baskets, books by authors I had mentioned loving during our marriage. I knew they were from Michael, attempts to rebuild some connection. I returned each one unopened, with a note requesting no further contact. Eventually, they stopped coming. Dating again proved more challenging than I had anticipated. The first few men I met through friends or dating apps seemed perfectly nice, but I found myself analyzing their every statement for inconsistencies, questioning their whereabouts, expecting deception around every corner. One promising relationship ended when he rightfully called out my interrogation-style questions about a work dinner that ran late. "I'm not your ex-husband," he said gently but firmly. "I haven't done anything to earn this level of suspicion." 10 months after the divorce, Michael's parents reached out to me directly. His mother, Martha, invited me to lunch, where she apologized for what their son had put me through. "We raised him better than that," she said, tears in her eyes. "I want you to know we don't condone how he treated you, regardless of what he was going through personally." Their kindness touched me deeply and helped heal a family wound I hadn't fully acknowledged. Almost a year into my new life, news reached me through mutual friends that Jason had become engaged to another man, a doctor he had met in Providence. Michael, meanwhile, had transferred to his firm's Chicago office, but was struggling professionally, his reputation having preceded him. The contrast between their diverging paths seemed emblematic of how differently people can emerge from the same situation, depending on their capacity for growth and change. My feelings about these developments were complex. I felt no satisfaction in Michael's struggles, despite the pain he had caused me. Jason's new relationship prompted neither jealousy nor resentment, just a distant hope that he had learned something about honesty from our situation. What surprised me most was my general indifference. These men who had once occupied so much space in my emotional landscape now felt like characters from a book I had read long ago. My Scorched Earth campaign had achieved its objectives. I had secured my financial future, maintained my professional standing, preserved important relationships, and established legal and social accountability for Michael's actions. Yet the victory felt hollow in unexpected moments. Winning hadn't immediately fixed everything inside me that had broken during those years of deception. The path forward would require more than strategic triumphs. It would demand emotional healing that no legal settlement could provide. 1 year after my divorce was finalized, I barely recognized my own life. I had sold the suburban house where Michael and I had lived and fully settled into my Back Bay condominium. I had cut my traditionally long hair into a stylish bob that friends said made me look younger and more confident. My closet contained clothes I would never have chosen during my marriage, bolder colors and styles that reflected my emerging sense of self. The therapeutic journey from anger to acceptance had been neither linear nor easy. Dr. Marshall guided me through stages of grief that sometimes seemed endless. "Healing isn't about forgetting," she reminded me during particularly difficult sessions. "It's about integrating this experience into your life story without letting it define you." Gradually, I learned to separate Michael's actions from my self-worth. His betrayal reflected his character flaws, not my inadequacies. This perspective shift didn't happen overnight, but emerged slowly through consistent therapeutic work and painful self-examination. I began reconnecting with friends who had drifted away during the divorce drama. Jennifer and Scott, a couple who had distanced themselves during the messy public phase, reached out with a dinner invitation. "We should have been there for you," Jennifer admitted over wine. We were uncomfortable and took the easy way out. Their honesty allowed us to rebuild a friendship that had once been important to me. New interests and hobbies filled the spaces previously occupied by marriage responsibilities. I joined a photography club that took weekend excursions to capture New England landscapes. A hiking group introduced me to trails I had never explored despite living in Massachusetts for years. Cooking classes taught me to prepare meals I enjoyed rather than always accommodating Michael's preferences. 15 months after the divorce, I took myself on a weekend trip to a luxury spa resort in the Berkshires. Alone in beautiful surroundings, I realized I was finally comfortable with my own company. I no longer felt the absence of a partner as a void that needed filling, but as space for my own expansion. This shift marked a significant milestone in my recovery. Early in my healing process, I had obsessively monitored Michael's social media accounts, tracking his apparent downward spiral with a mixture of vindication and lingering concern. Eventually, I recognized this habit as self-destructive and deleted all social platforms from my phone for a month-long digital detox. When I returned to social media, I did so with healthier boundaries, unfollowing accounts that triggered negative emotions and focusing on connections that inspired growth. My conversations with Dr. Marshall evolved from processing betrayal to exploring what I wanted from my future. If you could design your life without limitations, she asked during one session, what would it include? The question stumped me initially. I had spent so long reacting to Michael's betrayal that I had neglected to envision a future based on my own desires. New friendships emerged from unexpected places. Diane, a coworker I had previously known only casually, revealed during a late-night project session that she had survived a similar betrayal 3 years earlier. Our shared experience created an immediate bond. It gets better, she promised. Not just manageable, but genuinely better. Her thriving life stood as living proof of the recovery she described. The promotion I received came with an unexpected opportunity, the chance to lead the opening of our company's new Chicago office. The irony wasn't lost on me. Michael had moved to Chicago seeking escape, and now professional advancement was drawing me to the same city. After careful consideration, I accepted the position, viewing it as a chance for a completely fresh start away from the shadows of my past. Before leaving Boston, I wrote a letter to Michael that I never intended to send. The process of articulating my feelings without expectation of response proved unexpectedly cathartic. I expressed not just anger but grief for the future we had planned together, acknowledgement of good memories amid the betrayal, and finally, a form of forgiveness not for his benefit but for my own peace. I release you from the power to hurt me, I wrote in the conclusion. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I deserve freedom. After sealing the letter, I performed a private ritual, burning it in my fireplace and watching the ashes scatter, a symbolic release of the pain I had carried. My perspective on my Scorched Earth campaign evolved with time and healing. While I didn't regret protecting myself legally and financially, I recognized that some actions had been driven more by pain than necessity. The public humiliation aspects, while satisfying in the moment, hadn't contributed significantly to my healing. Justice and vengeance, I learned, were different destinations reached by different paths. My volunteer work at a domestic crisis center provided powerful perspective. Working with women navigating much more dangerous and complex separations than mine humbled me and redirected my energy toward supporting others. Their courage in leaving abusive situations with nothing but their children and hope made my own journey seem privileged by comparison, which it objectively was. 18 months after the divorce, I accepted a dinner invitation from Thomas, a marketing director I had met at an industry conference. Our conversation flowed easily, but when he suggested a second date, I found myself hesitating, old fears surfacing. Recognizing this as a growth opportunity rather than a warning sign, I pushed through the discomfort and agreed. I should tell you I'm recently divorced, I said toward the end of our evening. I'm still working through some trust issues. Thank you for your honesty, he replied. I appreciate knowing where you are and I'm not in any rush. His response, respectful of my boundaries without retreating from connection, marked the beginning of a slowly developing relationship based on transparency and patience. The experience of betrayal had fundamentally changed how I approached relationships. I developed clearer boundaries, became more attentive to red flags, and learned to trust my intuition rather than dismiss uncomfortable feelings. Paradoxically, these changes made me both more cautious and more authentic in connections with others. I no longer molded myself to accommodate a partner's expectations, but presented my genuine self, trusting that the right people would appreciate me as I was. Michael's parents, Martha and James, maintained contact even after I moved to Chicago. We exchanged holiday cards and occasional emails, their kindness a reminder that family connections sometimes transcend the relationships that created them. Their continued affection helped heal a particular wound, the loss of the family I had thought would be mine forever. In Chicago, I built a life that bore little resemblance to my married existence. My apartment overlooked Lake Michigan, a view I had chosen for myself rather than compromised on with a partner. I established new routines, discovered neighborhood restaurants and shops, and gradually developed a social circle unconnected to my past. The geographic distance from Boston created emotional distance from my previous life. 20 months after the divorce, I received a LinkedIn message from Maria, Jason's ex-wife. She was visiting Chicago for a conference and suggested meeting for coffee. Our conversation, spanning several hours at a lakefront cafe, provided unexpected closure for both of us. We were collateral damage in their story, she observed. But we've written better second chapters than they have. We parted with a hug and a promise to stay in touch, two women connected by parallel experiences who had each found their way forward. As I approached the 2-year anniversary of my divorce, I reflected on the strength I had discovered through adversity. The woman who had once believed her worth was tied to her marriage now recognized her intrinsic value. The betrayal that had seemed world-ending had instead been world-changing, painful but ultimately transformative. The most profound lesson I learned was about resilience. Humans have remarkable capacity to absorb shock, process pain, and rebuild. The heart I thought permanently broken had healed, not to its previous state, but into something stronger, more discerning, more authentically mine. I no longer define myself as Michael's ex-wife or a betrayal survivor. Those experiences formed part of my story, but didn't encompass my identity. I was Rebecca Mitchell, marketing executive, photographer, hiker, friend, daughter, sister, and someday perhaps partner again on my own terms. The final step in my healing journey came when Thomas invited me to dinner at an upscale restaurant overlooking the Chicago skyline. The setting, the anticipation in his eyes, suggested significance beyond our usual dates. As the evening progressed, I realized I was approaching a crossroads, the opportunity to open myself completely to new love despite past wounds. Before Thomas could speak what I sensed he wanted to say, I reached across the table and took his hand. "I'm still learning to trust again," I told him honestly. "But I'd like to keep learning with you if you're patient enough for that journey." His smile told me everything I needed to know about the path ahead. Not a return to naive trust or blind faith in happy endings, but a courageous choice to remain open to possibility despite knowing the risks. That, perhaps, was the truest form of healing, not the absence of scars, but the willingness to live fully despite them. As I look back on this journey from betrayal to recovery, I wonder how many of you have faced similar challenges in your relationships. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a profound betrayal? What helped you heal and move forward? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing to hear more journeys of resilience and transformation. Remember that even in our darkest moments, we contain the strength to rise from the ashes and create something beautiful from destruction. Thank you for joining me today, and may your own path, whatever its challenges, lead you to the peace and authenticity you deserve.